Raise a concern about workplace bullying. You raise a concern about sexual harassment. And nothing really happens. And these are leading JSC companies.
Coming up.
I recently went through something quite traumatic. I'm now able to speak about it. Right? There's something called workplace mobbing. And that's where people gang up against you and decide this person is not good for our brand because he or she has the ability to expose us.
It's where this rising is happening with women.
Yes.
We've had enough. I mean, Generation Beta was just now introduced January the 1st. They are growing up to witness this in full momentum. And it's going to be interesting to see how they are going to impact, where they're going to invest. And say, okay, right, what is the worst thing that can happen to me if I speak out and I say what's happened? Sometimes it's a sisterhood coming together.
That we can openly have these conversations, especially as public figures.
And what a pandemic it is how silent it is. Because nobody's talking about it in the public space because of the risk of I might lose my job.
Whether we realize it or not, subconsciously we are, in our own way, managing risk every single day, is to determine your risk strategy, your risk appetite, because every organization and us as human beings have different appetites for risk. You know, people often think that risk is all about something that goes wrong. Often we say we have a very liberal constitution as well, between risk and innovation. And I think the biggest factor for determining how do you get that balance right, especially if you're an organization.
Are you ready? I sit down with my friend Kovini Moodley, founder of Boss Babes South Africa, as we unravel risk like never before. We talk about risky business, we talk about risk in corporate, and all the things that you need to know to navigate and mitigate risk. Get ready for a fascinating conversation. If you want to join the Conscious Leaders movement, go to the following link: linktree/Carmen Murray. There you will find all the resources, activities, as well as the link to our podcast, the link to our YouTube channel, and then also all of the current activities that we are hosting, as well as access to our digital magazine. Thank you. Hey, Conscious Leaders, I have got a surprise for you. I have Kovini Moodley with us today, Boss Babe, who is an activist, who is a social media influencer, and she's always doing such incredible work in her movement. But today I'm going to bring out the Boss Babe in her because she is actually an award-winning risk manager. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, we got to get her onto the show so that we can actually talk the real meaty things. What is happening in the world of risk? We are at the dawn of a new year, new risks. You know how it goes, and that world is evolving. It ain't stopping for nobody. So what better person to bring into the room than Kovini Moodley? Hello.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. I have watched so many episodes of this incredible Conscious Leaders podcast, and I'm really looking forward to lending my thoughts to the world of risk management, best practice and trends.
I'm fascinated by, by the fact that you are on risk. You know, we come across that a lot in what we do.
Right.
And I think that it's underestimated. I don't think that we really understand how intense this world is. It was actually a few years ago, I was listening to an interview on risk, and they were using like these hypothetical scenarios of what happens in the world. And you're going, oh my gosh, is this a movie? Is this really happening? And I think that it would be wonderful to really go down that rabbit hole with you. We might not be able to discuss real-time risks as such, but it's just to have a good understanding as to what, really happens out there so that we can actually have better understanding of it.
So excited.
Okay, so before we get started, if you had to define risk in context of the modern times that we live in, how would you define it?
People often think that risk is all about something that goes wrong. It's only about things that go wrong. But the actual definition of risk speaks about things that could be positive or negative. So that's an interesting aspect.
Wow.
And I must say that a lot of us actually, focus on risk management. And I think what's important is to hone into the context within which an organization operates, and more specifically, us as human beings, right? Every single thing that we do every single day is us managing risk, whether we realize it or not. Coming here to this podcast, there's an element of risk, traffic jams, checking in beforehand to make sure that you're here on time. Whether we realize it or not, subconsciously, we are in our own way managing risk every single day from a personal perspective.
I love thinking about that because, it is something that we truly are, as above, so below. It is, if it comes down from a government perspective all the way through to an individual, within a home environment, we are definitely mitigating risk as much as we can. But it also, one thing I always say to my clients is this whole thing about making decisions from a fear perspective, the paralysis that you feel because you feel like you're almost boxed, and it actually, risk can sometimes take away so much from innovation. What is your view on that?
I think there's obviously a balance that needs to happen between risk and innovation. And I think the biggest factor for determining how do you get that balance right, especially if you're in an organization, is to determine your risk strategy, your risk appetite, because every organization and us as human beings have different appetites for risk. And depending on whether that's high, low, medium, very low, for example, that would define the amount of innovation that you're willing to take on versus the amount of risk. So for every organization, that is very different. And even us, from a personal perspective, that balance looks very different because some of us are risk averse, some of us love risk, some of us are go out and let's try what happens. So it just depends on you from a personal perspective, your personality, and the same goes for an organization.
You've touched on a very interesting point here. It's deciding on which risks you take. Because I'm imagining that there's so much happening in this world. I mean, like if you can just elaborate, for example, on inherent risk, residual risk, and emerging risk, right? There's so many options to choose from. So how do you decide which risk to pay attention to?
An inherent risk is a risk that sits within a particular process. And in order to get from inherent to residual, you need to implement controls, right? And depending on the strength of your controls, the effectiveness and efficiency of your controls, that determines your residual risk. So it's almost like, I want to say, a filter. So you get inherent risk, which is your risks without any controls. You layer your control environment above that, and you end up with something called residual risk. So ideally, your residual risks should be quite lower than your inherent if you have a control environment that is working effectively and efficiently and doing what it should be doing. I think it's very important to understand the terminology because your risk appetite speaks very closely to the type of controls that you're willing to implement. For example, compliance with laws, regulations, is something that best practice organizations would take a zero tolerance approach towards because no one wants to have any kind of risk when it comes to not following the law, not following constitutional law, not following labor law, for example. You want to bring that down to as low as you can. And in order to do that, you often have to invest resources, time, technology into making sure that that risk decreases to an acceptable level. I think we live in a world where, the reputational brands are just out there. Your reputation, what people say, the power of marketing is out there. Word of mouth marketing has just become so powerful. So you never want to be in a space as an organization where you're not following the rules, the laws, the regulations to the T. Because your best practice organizations, and thankfully I've worked for many of those, follow those rules. There will not be any form of deviation when it comes to ethical considerations or not following a particular law. And I think for me, that is the key of risk management, is to make sure that you are focusing your resources, your time, your effort on making sure that you are compliant with all the regulations that are out there.
You know, it's interesting to me, looking at the rapid evolution that we're seeing within the world of artificial intelligence, and also the sustainability revolution, where, moving towards green tech, for example, is becoming a priority for organizations, and where those data centers are housed, and, the policies and the governance and compliance and the procedures that need to be put in place. What I find interesting is we had an interview with Busi, where we were talking about cybersecurity and cyber resilience. And so many times, everybody is paying so much attention to the risks. But when a breach happens, they don't have their communication plan ready, or they don't have they've never done a fire drill where they can actually test if it's going to work out in the media and how it will be received, how the organization can function. What is your view on that?
I think, everyone's quite familiar with the POPIA regulation, right? The personal protection of information. It's something that's really critical today in South Africa, because we are sharing information with, organizations for pretty much everything that we buy into. And we expect there to be, some kind of ethics when it comes to managing that information. So information is only meant to be used for the purpose for which you share it, not for anything else. And I think of late, I've noticed, especially in news reports, there's a lot of cyber breaches happening. There's a ton of just information being shared, either, with parties within an organization that it should not be. Externally, we've seen quite a few huge breaches in the media of late. And I think for me, like you said, it's very important to have an action plan to rectify that when it does happen. But from a risk management perspective, for me, it's more important to put in place controls so that it does not happen. So a proactive approach when it comes to breaches and making sure that you're complying with POPIA is very important, because the repercussions of not complying with POPIA is, a 10 million rand fine, even jail time for the CEO. So it's quite huge. If you're breaching those regulations and you're not taking steps to make sure that our information, us as consumers, as members, is being well protected and used for the purpose for which it is intended.
I find this world so fascinating. We were doing an ethnography research report for one of our clients to understand, where's the industry going in terms of technology and, in terms of data protection. And I have to tell you, when I saw the complications also that happens from governance, where the legal cases that needs to happen, how you need to have funding for that, and how the preparation that you need to have, and how that can almost hinder the process of ethics, because so many breaches are happening. It's like, you don't have money to fight us in this regard,
right?
So we, if it was the regulator. The regulator doesn't have a lot of money to fight some of these corporates where they are having these huge breaches that are happening, that are compromising data of consumers. And I don't think that consumers realize how dangerous it is when your information is leaked. From a data enriching perspective, when we have to take data and we have to enrich it, in order to understand, so many errors are made by the call centers, right? And then you need to go and fix those errors. I can literally take your ID number and I can enrich it with 50 fields and know everything about you.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. That is scary.
And I can tell just by your cell phone number, I know so much about you. And if I was a hacker, I could do something with that information. Now, that information in the wrong hands has huge repercussions. I know also when we do data and analytics, we would always find ourselves like, the DTAs that we need to sign, where it's looking at the data subjects and the responsibility, how that stretches. Every person that gets that file could go to jail if there's a breach that happens. So it is so important to to recognize that these things are real, and as you say, the controls needs to be put in place. But I think for the ordinary person, I'm just thinking of a person that perhaps doesn't deal with the risk directly, also to understand what the implications is for an organization. So for example, a breach happens. Can you talk us through typically what could happen, like what could go wrong, and how this could impact the organization?
You know, that's a great question, because I've actually had a personal breach of late. Very concerning. Not going to mention the company's name at this point, but, you know, having your information breached, especially sensitive information, it feels violated, right? You feel violated in some way because you trust these organizations, these huge organizations, with your information. And we're talking about very sensitive information. And then it gets leaked, right? And then it gets into the wrong hands. And I think it's very dangerous when it gets into the wrong hands, because the context of that particular information can be misused. And that's really what the PAPIA Act is there to prevent, the misuse of information. I think that sometimes there needs to be greater controls within an organization to flag these things. So if my information, for example, is being breached, I should not be the one that goes and investigates and picks it up.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
You should have controls in your organization, especially if you're a JSE listed organization, to pick it up, to have the decency for me as a member, as a consumer, to reach out to me and tell me, you know, this is what has been breached.
Yes.
You know, if it's your credit card information, if it's your banking details, there could be serious things that could happen with that. People could go out, open accounts, people could go and clone you. We've heard of so many stories where information is now being used in syndicates, right? To clone people, to create multiple versions of one identity and start to use it to open up cell phone accounts and that sort of thing. So I think what's very important is when something does go wrong, that responsibility, and this comes back to what I often speak about when it comes to risk management, is ethical leadership, is to make sure that you have the decency to reach out to people and tell them, this is what has happened, we apologize, take steps to protect your information. This is what has been leaked. And in this particular case that I went through, there was no certainty around what had actually been leaked. And that was even more scary for me.
No, that is frightening.
Because
if they don't know, how are you going to know?
Exactly. Do I now become paranoid? Do I now start having anxiety about every spam call that I get? What is someone trying to get out of me? So I think definitely as organizations, we need to start to look at, you know, when something does go wrong, things are going to go wrong, right? That is what risk management is all about, managing, you know, things that are going to go wrong. But to have that, you know, ethical leadership to support how do we make this consumer relationship better? Yeah. How do we help people to know, okay, your banking details have been shared. There could be 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, different spheres of your information that have been shared. And this is what we suggest you do. Phone your bank, do this. Watch out for transactions that aren't great. Watch out for transactions that are unusual, abnormal. These are things that you should be doing. Watch out for information that may be leaked through various sources, because, you know, people talk. Yeah. People find information, people talk, it becomes a rumor. It sometimes becomes a toilet rumor, which is even worse. And I think this is very important. Yeah. And I think from a personal perspective, I'm able to speak about it because this is something that impacted me quite dramatically. And shocked me also. And I think it taught me a lot about risk management when something happens to you from a personal perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm so in agreement with you. So I must tell you, this was the most insane thing to see it happening, and the panic happen in real time, right? So remember we had that board adventure with, you know, we were at JLR, and one of the ladies that were there, we were waiting to take our turn to drive these vehicles, you know, our Jaguars and our Land Rovers, and going crazy. And one of the ladies said, oh my word, my WhatsApp has just been hacked. And she shows us all of the messages and scammers asking for money. And I thought to myself, oh my word, seeing it happen in real time, she was paralyzed. She didn't know how to act, what to do, how to handle the situation. And these people were going to her peers, and she's in the mining industry.
Can you imagine those conversations and what could be shared?
Can you imagine? I mean, like the
Member
distrust
data.
and the damage that can create, because now it enters a very personal space. Because remember, your mobile phone is a digital extension of who you are as a person.
Correct.
If I take your phone, I know exactly who you are just by taking your phone, right? There was this joke that was going around. If you want to date a guy, just ask him for his phone, right?
Right.
You'll know everything.
You'll know everything you need to know. That's true. It's very true.
Right. So, what is your views on how far it needs to go in terms of risk? Marketing, we come up with all these amazing ideas and campaigns. What should the involvement be from a risk perspective in what we as marketers do?
I think, again, it comes down to POPIA, right? And sometimes you get companies that want to force certain types of information, certain types of marketing, certain types of newsletters down upon you. I think it's important to make sure that you, as a consumer, as a member, is aware of what you've signed up for. Did you sign up for that? Did you not? And if you didn't, take time to actually unsubscribe to anything that you think you don't need. Or it's just there as a bell and whistle. I think now as consumers, the responsibility, as much as it's in other organizations that we're sharing this data with and trust, the onus and the responsibility does come back to us. Because it's our data. It's our life that could be impacted negatively if we don't take those precautions. So I think it's important to look at the terms and conditions to make sure that whoever we're signing up with is a reputable company. And that, there are repercussions if things go wrong. And what does that look like? What do you owe me if my information is shared? What type of communication do you owe me? How quickly are you going to communicate? Or are you going to wait for me to pick it up and then on the back foot try and, come up with some kind of, let's sweep it under the rug? I think that from a company perspective is probably one of the most dangerous approaches to risk management. You need to be proactive. With any kind of risk, you need to, and that's why I think you spoke about emerging risks, because every company should have a list of emerging risks. And that would be a risk that, arises greater than a year and less than 5 years. So it's important to do that predictive analysis as well to see, I've got this on my radar, and what am I doing to mitigate it? What steps am I taking, even though it could only, materialize greater than a year? What am I doing now?
So what emerging risk are you seeing?
I think the one emerging risk that will always be there for me is compliance to laws and regulations, being something you need to be doing now, but also to be able to assess the environment within which an organization exists, and to be able to predict what are the laws that are coming up, what are the regulations that are coming up. There are some huge ones in South Africa at this point that companies need to comply with. It's not something that is open for debate and discussion, right? So I think it's very important for organizations to understand their landscape. What are you going to be faced with? What are the steps that you are taking to make sure that there isn't a brain drain, for example, in the country? Right? What are those steps that you're now starting to put in place to say, in a year's time, we're going to have A, B, C, D regulations that are going to come out. It's causing panic. It's causing anxiety. What are we starting to do now? And I think that is when I talk about proactive risk management. It is very important for organizations to understand this and to comply, right? I think we live in a world where sometimes organizations want to have this mindset of being rebels. I personally don't appreciate that. I think as human beings, as organizations, you need to follow the law in which your organization operates in. We operate in South Africa. We have a great constitution. Often we say we have a very liberal constitution as well. And I think it's very important for us as organizations to map down what steps do we take, how do we invest to get to a point that we are not breaching any laws and regulations. And I know this for a fact that our best practice organizations in South Africa do that very well. Yeah.
I love that you were bringing out the word best practice, because if we look at what's happening in the world of technology, it's mayhem out there. And to apply ethics, because there's not enough governance, right? And sometimes we can't wait for legislation to catch up, we have to apply a best practice. And it gives me peace of mind to know that, businesses are also looking at how can we apply best practice, even though maybe that legislation is not happening at the moment. Or it's not at play.
Correct. We know that there's certain regulations that are going to come into effect in South Africa that are going to, hopefully drive equity that is much needed in this country, right? And I think it's important for us to embrace that. To embrace it is very important, because that is how we are able, from a social justice perspective, to make sure that all our lives, matter. All our lives are important, especially when we talk about healthcare and the future regulations that are coming up with healthcare in South Africa. I think we're in very interesting times when we talk about equity and trying to drive a bit more of an equitable landscape for the rich and the poor in South Africa.
And based on the NHI and where that is going, what are you seeing, and how is it going to shape healthcare for us in South Africa?
The first thing I like to say about NHI, because I think it's just very controversial, right? Everyone's got their own points around that and their own perspective. I grew up in a family where my entire family worked for government. My sisters were in the public healthcare system as doctors and specialists now, giving their best to the public healthcare. My mom was a teacher working for government. My dad also worked for the eThekwini. And I think that, watching them, I was the only one that was in private. And I think watching them do the work that they did was very aligned with their calling, was very aligned with contributing as civil servants towards South Africa, towards the South African economy. So when people talk about NHI and they say it's the worst thing, it's going to break the economy, that is not a great perspective to start from, I think, personally.
Agree.
Of course, you will have viewpoints, you will do the maths, you will do all of those great things. But I think for me personally, the concept of NHI, maybe not in its present form, but the concept of NHI, having this healthcare system where if I have a heart attack, or someone, that doesn't have access to medical aid has a heart attack, both our lives should be seen as very important. Both of us should be having access to save our lives, or at least a chance to save our lives. So from that concept, and from a human concept, a humanitarian concept, I think NHI is definitely a brilliant concept, right? It's a concept that says that your life is not more important than mine. And when something really serious happens, we both have the access to get the type of life-saving treatment. And I think that comes down to us being human beings at the end of the day. And when companies and when public figures, go out to the media and say, this is the worst thing for the economy, this is going to break the economy, it's going to cost X billion rand. Yeah, sure. But I think we also need to come back to basics and look at it from a human perspective.
Yeah, because we're losing touch with humanity.
We are.
It really scares me.
We are. Only if you have money, then you have access to private healthcare, and you have access to certain technology, of course, that you get within the private healthcare. And that means that your chances of living are sort of higher than someone else. That does not sit well with me. That worries me. That we can openly have these conversations, especially as public figures, put things out in the media that are very deeply rooted in the past historic, I want to say, climate of South Africa prior to 1994, where certain lives matter more than others.
Yes.
Where there's elements of white supremacy that is, still pervading our community and our society.
Yeah, totally.
And I think when we say NHI will not work, it's not going to work. That for me is very deep rooted in the past inequalities that South Africa has come out of.
And also not understanding the privilege.
Correct.
That comes with it, right?
Correct.
I've also sat sometimes in conversations where I'm just like, I don't want to be part of this conversation, because it's literally, this is not what it's about. everybody deserves equality and everybody deserves healthcare. One of the things, my father passed away during the pandemic, and he went to a government hospital, and they didn't have enough beds, and they had to send him home because he broke his hips. They had to send him home and then go in for the next operation, and then eventually he went into a coma and passed away because they couldn't provide him with the right healthcare. And why I'm mentioning that is, don't we want to see government hospitals flourishing so that they can take care and these things don't happen? I mean, can you imagine the pressure? And I understand why we had to go as a country into lockdown, because how else would we be able to accommodate millions of people that need to be hospitalized and be in ICU? So I think that, it's short-sightedness, it's myopic by not looking at the bigger picture and only looking at how does this impact my world. And I'm always like, go and be curious. Go and get and understand what I have this perspective, but what does it look like for other people before I have these comments or say these things, because I think it's always one-sided, and I think that one needs to look at different perspectives. And I hope that, having that consciousness or that awareness from boardroom to living room, as you say in the beginning, is mitigating these risks and looking at it. Are we looking at it from how it impacts us only, or how can we have equality in this experience?
So drive a little bit more of equality. I can say from my sister's experience, people in healthcare are worked to the bone. My sisters worked throughout COVID. It was an incredibly, I want to say, terrifying time for our family, because we were not sure if every day they were going to come back alive, or we were going to get a call to say, listen, something terrible has happened. So that was anxiety that our family lived in during the time of COVID. And the resources that they have are very limited. My sisters would often spend their own money buying masks, buying those hazmat suits, even buying certain types of, tools from a medication perspective to support the people that they are serving in the community. I think there's definitely a need for us to just open our minds a little bit more. Less about me and my family and that very, I want to say, little band at the top that can afford medical aid. And look at the rest of the country, and especially when it's more serious things. How do we give everyone that opportunity to live, to life?
And I think, I mean, I know I can have this transparent conversation with you, but I sometimes look at how far removed we're cocooning. The more scary the world is getting out there, the more isolated we're becoming. We're hiding in our homes. We don't want to be around people. With this digital personas that we have, and hiding behind our screens, not really being activists from a keyboard, and not really engaging with the world. And it's a dangerous place to be.
It is. And I think that's why it's important to have your hands on the ground. And I've just been lucky because, like I said, I've had, very close interactions with what exactly was happening in the public healthcare sector. And having people work so hard and not have resources. And there's a lot of challenges. I don't think anyone hides away from that. But how do we drive a little bit more balance? How do we support each other a little bit more as the private healthcare sector? How do we share resources? And I think really that is what NHI is trying to achieve from a principle perspective. And if people are not embracing the principle, I know, of course, there's elements of we're going to have to raise money and how we're going to get that. Of course, those are debates that are going to happen. But I think when I hear people just say, it's not going to work, or it's the most terrifying thing for this country, it hurts me. It hurts me because we've moved away from being human. And we've now moved into, like you say, a sense of privilege in my family, and it's just leave everyone else there and, let's protect ourselves. That isn't what life is all about.
It's so true what you're saying. And I want to almost talk about one of the biggest risks that we are facing in society at large is our mental health pandemic, and this mental health crisis that we're having. And I myself have seen this in many, many situations, from my personal home environment all the way through to friends and family. where people are denied healthcare because of mental health issues.
Yeah.
And also being a woman and knowing that going through menopause, how this is more prevalent for us.
Yes.
It concerns me how the companies out there have not adapted their policies and procedures to protect people that have, for example, medical aids or, going out to get help are denied some access because your cover doesn't cover you for this particular mental health issue. But it is such a huge problem and there's no way of stopping it. So what's the point? And I've experienced this, and I must tell you that it infuriates me at the very least. And it's a huge risk because if your medical aid cannot support you in that regard, how is your leadership in the company that you're working then supporting you? How are they helping to mitigate that risk, or how are they contributing to that risk? You and I, together with Conscious Leaders and Boss Babes, did this collaboration on GBV happening within the workforce. This GBV within corporates is also the corporate bullying that we need to talk about and how that is contributing to the risks that we are seeing within the world.
Yes.
What is your view on that?
I think it's very topical. And I say this even after the 16 days of activism, right? Because I think we focus so much on just those 16 days. And we think it's a time to almost be good during that time. And the rest of the year, do as you wish. Having the platform Boss Babes of South Africa, which is a female empowerment platform, daily I receive stories of women that are not treated well, that are disrespected, that are experiencing corporate GBV. And that's a real term. I didn't even know that it was called this.
No, I think I gave you the dyslexic term, which was GBV corporate. Okay. So totally.
It's a very real thing. And I think what's very interesting is that when we decided to have this conversation, we brought in leading experts. So we brought in your Mandate Malofi, who's very well versed in diversity, equity, inclusion. Amazing. She's amazing. Nene Molefe. And then we brought in some of the legal experts as well to actually weigh in on what I believe is probably one of the biggest risks within a company. I just feel that sometimes, when you look at a risk profile or a risk register, you're seeing the familiar risks. You're seeing the political instability, for example, the economic downturn. You're seeing cyber risk. These are risks that we know about, right? But I think for me as a risk professional and a risk specialist, what is very important for companies to be doing is to be looking for risks that you may not be very aware of, or risks that you don't necessarily want to talk about because there's embarrassment often when you have to speak about these type of risks. For me, corporate GBV is one of the biggest risks in corporate SA. And I say this because I have received a ton of information, and I receive a ton of information with company names, with what's happening, with gruesome details of what's happening, right? Stories, real life stories about what is happening. And I think this is something that is almost a hidden pandemic.
And it's funny, I'm sorry for interrupting you there, but I think I've had over 100 women.
Right.
That has come up with stories of things that are happening, crazy things that I actually can't explain to you how infuriating it is. And hearing you say that, and what a pandemic it is how silent it is. Yes. Because nobody is talking about it in the public space because of the risk of I might lose my job, my salary, my reputation, or I might need to take them to court. I mean, what do we do about this?
It is a silent pandemic, right? Because I think that when we had the COVID pandemic, it was so public. Yeah. Everyone knew what we were doing. The president was coming on there. We were hearing about what the next steps were. We were going into lockdown. It was all very serious, right? But I think that there are pandemics like corporate GBV that are so well hidden within organizations. And these are organizations that market themselves well. I think that is the most scariest part. Right? We're going to go into the digital marketing space just now. But you're marketing yourself so well. The perception that you're putting out to your audience, to your members, to South Africa as large is this sugar-coated version of what you really are. And I think for me, the biggest risk is, how are your employees experiencing your brand?
Yeah.
What are they feeling? When they go through something like harassment or sexual harassment or workplace bullying, what is happening? What steps are you as an organization taking to help that particular person to navigate it and come up with an outcome that is fair? I think fairness within corporates is just the biggest thing.
Yeah.
You know, and I've been fortunate because I've worked for some leading practice organizations. And I can say that in your leading practice organizations, this kind of thing is not tolerated. People that do not comply with the laws and regulations, especially the labor law, there's even a legislation on good workplace and good governance, which is where harassment is actually covered and articulated explicitly. And you find that companies just ignore that. It's just ignored. You raise a concern about workplace bullying. You raise a concern about sexual harassment. And nothing really happens. And these are leading JSE companies. These are companies that are meant to be complying with corporate governance, with King 4, with a whole host of, legislative elements.
Yeah.
And you're not taking it seriously enough because you think that, you can get someone to sign an NDC and exit quietly. And that will absolve you from any kind of responsibility. Newsflash, right? Newsflash.
I'm just listening to this and I'm like, boy, do they have it wrong. I don't think they understand the power of by word of mouth, right?
Word of mouth. And, we're living in a world of digital marketing.
Yeah.
We're living in a digital landscape.
Yes.
Right? So we've seen things being recorded.
Yeah.
We've seen things being recorded on a one-on-one with a manager and someone that's, experiencing this kind of bullying and harassment. We've seen things going viral. We've seen things in America going #MeToo. How do you think that started? Right? Even more topical now is the Blake Lively case that is popping up.
I know.
Right? How real is that?
That is insane.
How relatable is that?
I know, right? And and the gaslighting that is happening in that situation, and just seeing it all at play is
seeing it at play, and then also realizing that these things are not specific to South Africa. These things are now becoming a worldwide concern and a pandemic.
Yeah.
And I think it's very sad when companies, often your leading companies are going to take the part of your abuser or your harasser. And I found that they are just very well protected. And that for me is even more scary because in a world of digital, we can record anything on our phones, right? We can post it. We can share it. We can share it with people in our network, and who knows how it may be shared. So I think for me, the biggest risk that sometimes organizations ignore is when your own processes and your own protocols are not being followed. And that for me is a symptom of something greater. It is a symptom of your culture. We talk about workplace culture. We talk about tone at the top. We talk about a fish rots from the head.
Yeah.
And all of these elements of harassment, bullying, the mistreatment, the disrespect of women, stereotyping of women of color, for example, you're too loud, you're too much, you're aggressive, you're angry, stems from the tone at the top. Because, like I said, working for some of the leading organizations, there is ethical leadership, and that's where it starts.
Yeah.
If you've got ethical leadership, they will not tolerate women being mistreated. They will not turn a blind eye and pretend like they don't know what's happening, right? And I think the biggest advice for those that want to manage their risk, especially the ones that you think are not going to pop up because you're going to give this person a little NDC, intimidate them, threaten them enough to the point that they leave on their own terms, and think that an MSA, or that's a mutual separation agreement, or an NDC is going to protect you. Remember that those contracts do not protect organizations when it comes to ethics.
Yeah.
Right? Misconduct, corruption, for example. Those are things that you cannot sign away.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of organizations get that wrong because they're under the impression that the risk of this person is gone, and with them is gone everything that we've done to them, everything that we've perpetuated against them. But just bear in mind that your biggest risk is sometimes not addressing problems properly, but rather forcing people out of organizations through bullying tactics and other tactics that don't align with our constitution.
Yeah. And something that also with what you're saying is we've come to an age where we honor transactional leadership. And where it's always the person that brings in the most revenue, or the person that can actually take they can be a bully, they can do whatever they want, right? But when it comes to making that core decision who goes, it's the one that's going to bring you most money. With AI, they predict that in the future when we have autonomous vehicles is that it will be connected to your net worth and how much money you have, and it can if an accident needs to happen or accident will happen, that it will save the life of the person with the most net worth in the future. That is that is where some futurists have even looked at in terms of where it could potentially go. It's not saying that it would, but there is a high probability that would be the case. Now, if we look at that, that's a scary thing to think about. But this is already happening within organizations, right? Where, decisions are sometimes made not based on what is right and what is wrong, but it's made on this person we need to have, this person we can't get rid of, this person, let's protect this person as much as we can. And I might be completely I've seen it happen with my own eyes, so I know that it exists. But it doesn't mean that we can stereotype all organizations in doing so, because there are organizations that are doing a remarkable work to be inclusive and putting their feet on the ground saying, we will not stand for this. But I think it gets tricky, as you say, when it starts impacting so much more stakeholders, when it's JSE organization, right? Because if you go one foot in the wrong direction, your stocks plummet, everything goes wrong. But the thing is, what I'm loving about the age that we're in, and you can probably also agree with that, is we're moving into an age where this rising is happening with women. We've had enough. Women are going to start making decisions based on what they know. And, the decision-making process is not just about what you're saying from a marketing perspective. It is how I feel about you, how you as a business have perhaps created something so vile for me in my career, or you have contributed to my mother, or you've contributed to what I've seen, and I will not support your brand because of what it has done in our household and how we've lost everything because of what you've done. It's a 25 generational observation that is happening, and this is perhaps one of the biggest risks, right? I mean, Generation Beta was just now introduced January the 1st. They are growing up to witness this in full momentum, and it's going to be interesting to see how they are going to impact, where they're going to invest, where they're going to make decisions, how they're going to make decisions based on what they're witnessing in their households.
Absolutely. And I think you spoke earlier about mental health, and I just want to unpack that very quickly. You spoke about struggling with mental health and then not having access to the right type of support. There's a concept called PMBs, prescribed minimum benefits. And I think it's very important, irrespective of whichever medical aid you are on, right? Every medical aid needs to provide a basic level of care, and that's what we refer to as PMBs. There's a whole list of conditions in there, and there are some mental health conditions in there as well. So that means a PMB would be something that you could access from a state perspective, that a medical aid needs to provide to you. And I think a lot of people, it's not spoken about a lot. But I think it's very important, irrespective of which medical aid you are on, to start to ask from a PMB perspective, what are your mental health benefits that you're offering? I recently went through something quite traumatic. I'm now able to speak about it. And I was able to access benefits to support me during that process.
Wow.
Right? Benefits with a specialist, benefits with a psychologist, a host of benefits, and none of it came out of my MSA.
Wow.
Right? So there's a separate basket that every medical aid needs to have that gives you access to out-of-hospital consultations with a therapist or a psychiatrist, whatever it is you need, or 21 days within a medical facility. Right? So we don't know about this, and I think it's not also well marketed, right? I, of course, used the 15 days out of hospital benefit, and I'm sharing this because I think it's important for those that may be experiencing bullying, harassment, whatever it is you could be experiencing that is contributing to impacting your mental health negatively, to start to ask these questions and access those benefits. Because there are 15 consultations, as far as I know, that are basic when it comes to medical health. And I did not pay a cent from my savings.
Sure.
I got the 15 sessions. I got the help I needed. I feel incredible at this point, having taken the initiative to address the trauma that I experienced. And it feels great. It feels great to have that support. But what's also important for us as women is to acknowledge when we need that support and not be stereotyped by saying, if I get help from a psychiatrist or a psychologist, I'm going to be less than, because someone's programmed that to us to say you're weak. You don't deserve to be in a leadership position because of A, B, and C. And often it is companies that are creating these conditions that women have to now experience. And I think it's important that you get the help that you need, to acknowledge that you need the help, and to make sure that you ask your service provider about PMBs. Because like I said, I accessed 15 last year. I made good use of it. I didn't pay a cent for it. And I'm not on a very high plan. I'm on a hospital plan.
Okay. Well, yeah. I just want to say thank you for your bravery, and thank you for sharing that with us today, because so many times we tolerate and we hide behind the name of resilience to say we can't speak about these things.
We have to be strong.
Yeah, we have to be strong all the time. Sometimes it's a sisterhood coming together and saying, listen, we're not going to stand for this, but it takes courage to get into the arena.
Yes.
And to say, okay, right, how am I going to do that? And I think that this is what's so powerful about the community that you've created, is like, anything that happens to you, they are there full out to support you. And I mean, I've seen how the women, and we even within Conscious Leaders, how we rally behind each other. Like when there's a crisis, do you know where I can go and sort this out? Or, this has just happened to me. Please help me out with this thing. It's quite incredible. And I just want to implore everybody listening, if you're going through something like this, I mean, reach out to Kovini, but also I really implore you to look at the situation and mitigate these risks in your life and say, okay, right, what is the worst thing that can happen to me if I speak out and I say what's happened?
Correct.
I mean, what advice would you give to them?
A lot of the people that I mentor, the young professionals, talk about being in what they call a toxic workplace, right? And some of the attributes of a toxic workplace is, of course, unfairness, being disrespected, being overworked, sometimes being given additional portfolios, promised promotions, and it never happens, for example. These are all attributes of a toxic workplace. And again, it stems from the tone at the top. In leading best practice companies, you don't have toxic work environments because your leadership is so strong that when anything happens, even at the bottom layer, they are hands-on and they take the necessary steps to fix that. So for me, my advice is, if you are stuck in a toxic work environment, is to get legal advice, right? Often we think that HR and our IR departments are there to protect us and support us. I can safely say that that those roles are meant to protect risk from a company perspective. So if there's a bully there and, you know, there's a bully and there's a you, and the bully is at a senior level and you're somewhere down there, to manage the risk, the reputational risk of that company, the natural thing is that the bully is going to be protected. In a toxic workplace, of course. I've worked for companies where the bully was on the next plane out back to the country that they came from after a few people had complained. And that's good corporate governance.
You see, I told you there's some corporates that do great things.
Right? And to watch that bully pack their bags and pack their box and leave.
Wow.
You know,
did you do a standing ovation?
Organizations and you go, wow. You go, wow, my voice was heard. I was seen.
Yeah.
I stood for something, and I didn't just stand for myself. I stood for other people around me that were not brave enough to speak up. But when you do choose to speak up in a toxic environment, there are going to be repercussions, guys.
Yeah.
You are going to have retaliative behavior coming at you from all forms and all angles. And it's not going to just be from one person. Right? There's something called workplace mobbing. And that's where people gang up against you and decide this person is not good for our brand because she has, or he or she has, the ability to expose us. Right? So let us come up with a plan. The five of us will work together, and whatever this person does, we will retaliate. So suddenly your work wouldn't be great. Suddenly what you said wouldn't be great. Just all of a sudden. The minute you decide to speak up, know that there's going to be retaliative behavior. And not all of us are made for this, right? There's a fire inside of me that wants to do right by people. So I want to say I have a lot of that in me, where I want to fight, not just for myself, but more importantly, I want to fight and impact those around me. I want to support those around me. But my advice to those that are in toxic workplaces is to define an exit strategy for yourself. Right? Know that you need to find something outside of where you are and do that, right? Start actively looking for that next role. And then also document every single thing, right? Record things, use your phone to record things so that when it's thrown against you and it was said, we never said that, the gaslighting that we spoke about, you have actual evidence. And I think for me, you know, being stuck in a toxic environment is very draining. So get the help that I spoke about. Get that mental health support that you need to help you through that transition period. Because when they choose to come at you, they will come at you with every single thing. Even things that are made up. Even things that are invented, like literally invented.
You know, I came across a study many years ago that was done in America where they said the PTSD that people experience from toxic workplaces leads to about 50% of divorces that happened within America. One of the partners would have been going through a PTSD situation from a toxic workplace. And I have to tell you, I'm paraphrasing, I might have the stats out a little bit, but it was very high. And I don't think that the reputational risk is completely comprehended, and also what it does to a culture.
Yes.
Because this is a cultural pivot in the wrong direction. And what that means for the future. You know, this is why, you know, we're so passionate about conscious leadership is because we want to see a change. We want to see a change in how people behave, not just in a way that they show up in business, but how they lead their lives, the decisions that they make on a day-to-day basis. But it's also about leading consciously, leading people consciously, and really having their hearts in your heart as well, and really thinking about how what you do, say and act, and how you do things will implicate people, even if it's just within your team environment, and you can't necessarily change the whole organization, but within your team you can do it.
Correct.
And create those guardrails.
Correct. I think what's important is there needs to be an intention.
Yes.
Often there's governance, there's policies, there's all these documents that are written out. But what is important is, does your leadership want to actually become more conscious? Do they want to embed ethics, morality, integrity into every single thing that they're doing? I know we assume that this is what's happening, But the sad reality is that often if there's an easier route to take, people will take that route.
Yeah.
A route that doesn't cost money, or a route that can be swept under the carpet until such time we find a way of dealing with it. My advice as a risk professional is to make sure that you are addressing issues.
Yeah.
Not just leaving them, or make people feel heard. People want to be heard. People want to be seen. No employee in their right mind will concoct a story and say, I'm being harassed or I'm being bullied.
There's too much risk involved in doing that.
Why would you do that if you don't have the evidence?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Listen, I want to say thank you so much for your vulnerability. As I told you, you are a gift. You are a gift, and we're so grateful. And I'm so honored that I can call you a friend and, reach out and ask questions. And, you're always so giving in everything and every way that you do things. And I just want to say thank you for being you. And we're all behind you. We will support you in whatever we can. Go and make those things happen and follow the calling.
Yes.
And keep doing what you're doing. You are such a blessing.
Thank you. The calling has always been to inspire my audience authentically.
And you do that.
And that is why when I show up on a podcast or on my own platform, it really is about sharing the good, bad, and ugly. For me, using my platform is not just about my highlight reels. I try and bring balance into everything that has shaped us, everything that has contributed to who we are today. And I think that is very, very important in a world where everything is airbrushed and everything is perfect and all you see is just, beautiful pictures of people. There's a lot that is happening behind the scenes. And thank you for this opportunity, for allowing me to be vulnerable, to share some of my trauma, to share some of the struggles that I've managed to overcome. And hopefully 2025 brings me towards a space where I can align, especially from a career perspective, with companies that embody who I am as a person, embody what I stand for, and hopefully align our values and morals. And that's for me is where the magic happens.
Yeah. And I do think that we need to bring you back at some point in time when you feel comfortable to go into the story, that we can unpack that story so that for the women out there that feel that they need to find healing, that you can navigate and help them through your story. Absolutely. So we will definitely schedule another session when you're ready.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like I said, I've been on a healing journey and I'm feeling really great about 2025. And I don't think I would be here if I hadn't taken the steps to acknowledge that there was trauma happening and I needed to work on, how do I feel better? How do I increase my self-esteem?
Yeah.
How do I build my confidence up again? And I think that, in a few months' time, I'm definitely going to be ready to share my story with you and hopefully the world. And also looking at just, partnering with some of our leading streaming agents in the country to be able to tell the story of, trauma.
Yeah.
Because we hide away from it. And I think when we hide away from it, we actually protect people.
Yeah.
We protect and we embrace certain behaviors that we should not be. Your ethical principles align with that organization. And that there's morality, right?
Yeah.
There's one thing we want to do more of in 2025 is just be more moral, more human.
Totally. Love you to bits.
Thank you
so
Love
much.
you lots as well. Thank you. I can't wait for this to be shared and, get the views of our audience as well.
Yeah, 100%. It was so much. Well, I wouldn't say it's fun because it's not fun hearing these things. Right. But it's always so good to share energy with you and be in the room with you, and also just to, realize that we can still be ourselves, still talk business, still talk our lives, and we can bring all those conversations because we are multifaceted, right?
Correct.
That's what we're all about.
Correct.
And thank you for sharing your multifacetedness with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Anyway, that's it from us.